Welcome, everyone, to the February indoor meeting, Raleigh Astronomy Club. Any first-time guests? Oop. All right, welcome. Wow, quite a few first-timers. Wonderful. So we have a presenter today who's going to be on Zoom. Typically, we say to hold the questions, but this is going to be an interactive session. So if you have questions on Zoom, please put them in the chat. If you have questions in the room, I'll run a mic, or somebody will run a mic to you. Raise your hand. Let's see. Safety stuff. Identify room hazards. So we have cables behind the projector. We've covered them with a mat. Please be careful. Don't die. I say that to my kids all the time, sorry. Chairs with bags beside them, trip hazard. Low lights will probably turn, well, I'll go ahead and turn some lights off. Now we have low lights. Theatrical. I don't have like a good theater voice. Okay. Yeah, that's true. How about I'll play with that later, Frank. That's you good? All right, thanks. Anybody CPR certified? We have two. Wonderful. Thank you. Hopefully we won't need to call on you. Designated emergency caller if there's a problem. All right. Anna? Okay. Thank you. Fire equipment. I think we have a fire extinguisher by this door over here. And remote attendees, be aware of your surroundings, please. We have two exits. One exit over there, behind the curtain that's drawn in the middle, and then out the doors and to the left. All right, real quick, upcoming events. We have tomorrow, unless it was, I think this was postponed. Okay, so March 1st, scratch out February 22nd. I didn't have a chance to update this. March 1st, start gazing on TAP Star Party in Cameron. On the 3rd, Sanderson High School astronomy class. 6th, Math and Science Night, Washington Elementary School. 7th, First Fridays, hopefully, at Three Bears Acres. And on the 8th, Astronomy Night at Joyner Park. Yes, Blair. Willard. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so we've had a couple events move because of weather this week. Willard will be Wednesday coming up this week. And what was the other one? Morrisville Library on Thursday. Okay. Calendar is up to date. If you had previously volunteered for those and still want to go, please volunteer again, because we try not to assume that you're still available. Okay. So our talk tonight is stone structures in New England and archaeoastronomy. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. Russell Pinizzotto has been observing the universe since he was less than a year old. 70 plus years later, he's an Astronomical League Master Observer and Master Binocular Observer with a collection of at least 8 telescopes and 3 binoculars. He's taught introductory astronomy over 20 times before he retired last year in June, after being in academia for 30 years. He's completed over 50 Astronomical League observing programs and challenges and is currently working on several more. He is the AL Galaxy Group and Cluster Program Coordinator. On a clear night, you can usually find him observing the skies from his home in Maine. And Russ, we are going to change the screen share real quick. We'll get into the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen.
Yes.
Can I do that now? Okay, let's do this. Hopefully everybody can see this first slide. As Naveen told you, my name is Russ Pinizzotto. I'd like this to be interactive. If you have questions, don't feel like you have to wait to the end or the middle or anything else. Just yell them out or grab the microphone from Naveen or put them in the chat. I am a member of our own astronomy club up here in Maine. In case you're wondering where I'm located, I'm about an hour north of Portland, Maine. So it's about a 3 hour drive north of Boston. We have about 2 feet of snow on the ground right now. We were talking about this a little earlier. Okay, so let's talk about some stone structures in New England and what we might be able to see and what that all means and what archaeoastronomy is all about. So if we talk about archaeoastronomy, obviously we're talking about something that happened a long time ago. And it's trying to figure out how ancient structures might be aligned with astronomical directions. And the most famous one of these is this, which I'm sure almost everybody recognizes instantaneously. This is Stonehenge in England. And in the early 1960s, using an IBM mainframe computer, they did a whole bunch of calculations and decided that there were a whole bunch of astronomical alignments at Stonehenge. The most famous one of these, of course, is in the summer solstice sunrise. But as soon as you align something with the summer solstice sunrise, it's automatically aligned with the winter solstice sunset. They're on exactly the same line. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of explanations of what's going on at Stonehenge, other than to remind you that in the mid 1960s, there was a very famous book published called Stonehenge Decoded, which talked about all of this and generated an incredible amount of interest. It's not really clear whether the interest was because of Stonehenge or the fact that they actually used a computer to do some of the calculations. People still flock to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is now blocked off most of the year, but for a couple of times, like during the summer solstice sunrise, people are allowed to actually go stand around the stones, which they normally are not. And on average, about 20,000 people show up for this. So the idea of archaeoastronomy still is very popular. You don't have to have anything as complicated as Stonehenge, though, in order to do archaeoastronomy. This little sketch just shows that you can line up two objects, in this case, something in the middle with a stone out here. And then if you look over them, you can figure out what's going on. You can line these stones up however you want. So in various locations around the world, there are these alignments, and they're usually aligned with one of the big days during the year. Either the solstice sunrises and sunsets, both winter and summer. Once you can do that, you can also figure out east and west directly on the equinoxes, and that means you can also do north and south. So you can have lots of alignments and put lots of these stones up all over the place, depending on what it is you want to look at. I particularly like this particular sketch, which is not mine, because it also talks about moon rises and moon sets. And there are what are called major lunar standstills and minor lunar standstills. The orbit of moon is tilted 5 degrees relative to the ecliptic plane. And so what that means is moon can rise and set 5 degrees on either side of sunrises and sunsets. When we look at the biggest changes from north to south, those are called the major lunar standstills, because it looks like the particular location where moon rises doesn't stand still at that particular point. And the end of last year and this year is actually a major lunar standstill. Now, solstices mean sun is standing still. It looks like the motion of sun across the horizon has stopped. So there are things called lunistes, which are the lunar motions look like they've stopped where they tend to be located along the horizon. So you can do this, and you can actually set one of these up in your own backyard if you wanted to do that. And some people have done that. The question is, we know all about Stonehenge in England. Did anybody actually do this with just these kinds of stones and rocks and things like that? And the answer is yes. This happens to be a stone circle in the western United States, and was established by Native Americans. And it's been determined that these locations line up with the summer solstice and with the rising and setting of very important stars in Native American culture. So we know that not only Stonehenge has lots of alignments, but there are many, many, many hundreds and hundreds of ancient structures now that we know are aligned. In fact, even some of the cathedrals in Europe are astronomically aligned. But that's not what we're talking about tonight. The question is, did anybody actually do this in New England? I don't know if those of you in North Carolina think about that people do this in North Carolina. There are a few archaeoastronomy sites in North Carolina, but we're not going to be talking about those tonight. The real question here is, did anyone do this in New England? And the answer must be yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here speaking to you about this. So let's look at one of maybe the better known ones. Any of you ever heard of MIT Henge? MIT Henge. This is called the Infinite Corridor. This goes all the way across these buildings at MIT. It's over 200 meters long. And it turns out that sunset aligns with this 200-meter long corridor twice a year. And so it's called MIT Henge. You can't see sunrises because over here, this building blocks the sunrises. But when you look at sunsets, there's nothing in the way of the sunset. So it turns out that the sunset does align with this gigantic corridor. And that happens twice a year, like I said. Here's pictures with sun. These are time over time. You can see it totally lines up with this 200-meter long infinite corridor at MIT. But I'm sure you didn't invite me to come and speak to you about MIT. And I thought about whether I really wanted to do this or not, because actually I went to Caltech and not MIT. So let's move on. You probably want to hear more about what's going on in New England. There are many, many sites in New England. I happen to pick 6 of those, one for each of the New England states. So this is the order that I'll be talking about them. There is a site in New Hampshire called America's Stonehenge, which is probably the most complicated of all of them. There are several other chambers we'll be talking about: the Upton Chamber in Massachusetts, a site called Calendar 2 in Vermont, the Gungewamp Calendar Chamber in Connecticut, the Belmont Stone Chamber in Maine, and then finally a totally different kind of site. It's the Newport Tower in Newport, Rhode Island. So we'll be talking about these 6 potentially archaeoastronomy sites. Now, I say potentially because there are some real provenance questions about some of these and what's going on, especially related to America's Stonehenge and maybe even Newport Tower are probably the 2 most questionable. But I'll talk a little bit about those as we go. Okay, America's Stonehenge. It's located in Salem, New Hampshire, just over the border from Massachusetts. And the picture that I use for the title slide, plus this one, shows these interesting looking stones that seem to be aligned. You see there are no trees anymore. As I show you these, you'll see that there are openings and gaps in the trees because the people who own the site now chopped all the trees down along these lines. However, when this site was thought to have been used thousands of years ago, it was a bald mountain. These trees did not exist at that time. But so all the pictures you see, it'll make it look like it's wooded, and you may wonder how can they know about these alignments and how come they have all these gaps in here? Well, these gaps are man-made. One of the questions you might have. Uh, there is an astronomical observing station, which is the center of all of the astronomical alignments that we're going to talk about at America's Stonehenge. And that's not this, that's this little wooden tower that originally was constructed in the 1930s when people had conversations about what was going on here. This was called Mystery Hill in the late 1700s through the 1800s. It's now in the middle of a suburban town, Salem, New Hampshire, in New Hampshire. Uh, this big stone, in case you're wondering about it right here, is called the sacrificial table. I don't want to get into that too much, but you'll see as we start looking at these structures, there are all these kinds of stacked stones all over the place and making different kinds of structures. For example, this is called the watch house. It's a very small open area where a person can sit inside and look down the hill and watch people coming up the hill. This isn't necessarily astronomically aligned, but it just demonstrates what some of these structures in New England actually look like. This is the south-facing chamber, though, and this is more characteristic of what we're going to see tonight. Lots of very thin stones stacked on top of each other. They usually have some lintel stones on top. They have small openings that you have to either crawl into or I don't think you could stand up, even bend down and get through this one. And this happens to be facing directly south at the end of a north-south wall, a wall that's been constructed exactly north-south. So this is the south-facing chamber, okay, at America's Stonehenge. And then we have these kinds of stones that I was telling you about before. This particular one, if you were standing at that astronomical observing station that I showed you earlier, and you looked out over the stone, the summer solstice rises right over this stone. Very cool, pretty neat. So that's the summer solstice sunrise. I told you a little bit earlier when we were talking about Stonehenge that if you are aligned with the summer solstice sunrise in the opposite direction, you have the winter solstice sunset. And so if you extended that and look, I don't know why it keeps switching. If you look the other way, this is the stone that actually was in the title slide. This is aligned with the winter solstice sunset. This particular shape with these two shoulders, these unequal shoulders, is characteristic of a lot of stones that were used for alignments throughout all of New England. And one of the questions is, was this done on purpose? Was this chiseled in, or did they find these stones and then just use them for markers? And the answer for that's not very well known. So here's looking back. This is from the back of that same stone with these shoulders and looking right back at that astronomical observing station, what's called the astronomical observing station. And you can see that the trees behind it are cleared out, like I was telling you before. Okay. There is a stone to the north that marks north. There is a stone wall that marks south. And on either side of this, you can't really see in that photograph, but about out here are two other smaller standing stones that are thought to mark the position, the extreme positions of Thuban in about 2000 BC. Now, under this stone, they actually have done some carbon dating and they found some ashes and things. And these are thought to be over 2,500 years old. So at least from the carbon dating under the stones. And then finally, here's a Google Earth picture. If you go to Google Earth and you type in America's Stonehenge, it will take you to this and you can see these supposed alignments all through here. not only for the sunrises and sunsets, but north and south, east and west. Then you might be wondering, what the heck are these other ones for? And they mark the cross quarter days. So in the ancient Celtic calendars, the cross quarter days, which were the days halfway between the solstices and the equinoxes, were also important. They all have their own Celtic names, and there are stones that appear to be aligned with the cross quarter days, as well as the solstices and the equinoxes. So interesting. If you look at a map of this is where it gets a little freaky. You can see these big stones are aligned, but there's some other things that are thought to align. And then um, at this point, because they don't all cross exactly at the same place, you might wonder, how realistic is this? So let's go back. And while we're looking at this picture, let me tell you a couple of things about America's Stonehenge. America's Stonehenge is currently owned by the Stone family, believe it or not. Robert Stone bought this entire area of about 150 acres in the early 1950s, but he did not know about all of these astronomical alignments when he bought it. He bought it because of those other little stone structures that I told you about, and the potential to develop this into a tourist site, which it currently is. So you can go to America's Stonehenge, you can visit it, and you can walk around, and they'll give you the map, and you can do all those kinds of things. Now, when I was teaching astronomy at Merrimack College, we used to go to America's Stonehenge on a field trip, because it's only about a half-hour drive from North Andover, where Merrimack College is located. And I gave all the students compasses and told them they needed to go measure all the orientations and see if they matched what we would expect for the equinoxes and solstices and all those other kinds of things, including the cross quarter days. And the answer is yes, they definitely are aligned. Okay, so far so good. When were these alignments discovered? These alignments were discovered in around 1965. What did I tell you also happened in 1965? Stonehenge and Stonehenge Decoded were published, and there was a big TV special on, which I still remember. I was a teenager at the time, but I remember watching this, being totally fascinated by it all. At that point, Robert Stone started wandering around his property looking for alignments and alignment stones, which weren't unknown to exist at that time, and he found them. So that immediately brings up a question. So they weren't discovered ahead of time? They were discovered because you were looking for them? The answer is yes. The other thing is this site, because the buildings were these little structures that I showed you, and all these piles of rocks were already quarried like these, made it very easy for anybody who needed to be quarrying rocks. And they did. And the city of Lawrence, which is very close to Salem, New Hampshire, went up to Mystery Hill, as it was called at the time, and took apart a whole bunch of stuff and used these things for curbstones. So the provenance is really messed up. There are also people who lived on this site in the 1700s. That's why I put the question mark. Is it really archaeoastronomy or not? And the provenance is so questionable that I'm going to leave it up to you, I think, to decide in your own mind whether you think this site really is for real or not. Thousands of years old. There are many, many stories about it. It's one of the reasons why it was called Mystery Hill. But we know people quarried there. We know people lived there. We know people used some of these structures as storage areas. And so it's really hard to decide. The bottom line, though, it is astronomically aligned. There is no doubt about that in my mind. But I'll tell you a funny story about that. I went and visited during summer solstice one day, and there are people who, like druids, come out and dance around and are in robes and things, watching sunrise on the summer solstice. And Dennis Stone, who is Robert's son, who now runs this facility, pointed out that they were all looking at the wrong things. They were not really looking at the alignments the way the alignments were. Okay. Another reason to wonder what exactly is going on at America's Stonehenge. But all of these stones are definitely astronomically aligned. Okay. Any questions about that? Any questions about what's going on in New Hampshire? I see a hand, but Naveen will have to get you the microphone. Is that a hand up or somebody taking a picture? Can't tell.
I think Frank was
Naveen?
taking pictures.
Oh,
We do have a question. One moment.
okay. Yes? Question?
This site you just showed here, is
Yeah.
that an actual museum, an outdoor museum that you can actually visit?
Yes.
with-
So it's run by the Stone family, and it's run as a place to visit. So I think it cost about $8.50 to get in and wander around.
Also,
Uh,
at the edge of the mount, I see what looks like a subdivision with homes and other stuff. Is that what I'm looking at there?
That's exactly what you're looking at. It is in the middle of the town of Salem, New Hampshire. So these are all modern houses on both sides. So you just drive up this road here, and this is the entrance to, and you can see some of the path that you can go wander around on.
It
And this
shows
is
just
where,
how it shows just how built up everything is. It's why you
yep,
just about don't see forest ranger towers anymore. All if you see
cor-
something that you just get out your cell phone.
yep, correct. So most of these sites, some of the sites I'm going to tell you about are actually on private property and you can't visit because the owners actually don't want visitors. This one is exactly the opposite. These owners are actually promoting the site. Now, you can go snowshoeing there in the winter. They have an alpaca farm. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. They have a visitor center. So, yeah,
Yep.
that's
Russ,
what I was saying.
we have a question in chat. Have the stones been dated?
The stones, they have done multiple carbon dating, carbon 14 dating, which you don't do on stones. You need organic materials. So they have dug various holes and things and found ashes and other stuff that can be dated. And those have been dated as being thousands of years old. Uh, the stones themselves have been quarried out of the hill, so I don't know what you would gain by dating the stones themselves. Yeah, another question.
Doug Lively with RAC. So I have a question about sites like this. Don't they need to be aligned with Earth's rotation as well? I mean, else precessions would over time cause them to become less accurate.
Right. So that's a great question because you think about precession. What precession does is change the dates of the equinoxes and the solstices, but not the angles. So, for example, Sirius is called the dog star, and we talk about the dog days of summer, and Sirius is a winter star. What? What? What's that all about? It's because of precession. So the precession isn't going to change the solstices and the equinoxes. It could change the directions of north and south. So, like I pointed out a little bit earlier, there are two other stones up here on either side of the north marker that are thought to have demarcated the extent of Thuban moving because thousands of years ago, you know, Polaris was not a pole star. It was Thuban was closest to the pole. So, and thousands of years from now, Vega will be close to the pole. So those kinds of alignments change, but the angles for the equinoxes and solstices do not. That's why Stonehenge still works, for example. It's just the dates. The dates changed, not the angles for those.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yep, sure. Okay, let's just move on a little bit, see if you have some questions about these other ones. The Upton Chamber in Massachusetts is nowhere near as complex as the site that I just showed you in New Hampshire. This just looks like a little one of those watch rooms, or the south-facing chamber that I showed you. Again, stacked up stones, lintel over the top. However, once you crawl in there, you find out that this is a very long, narrow opening, and it opens into a big room that has almost a 10-foot ceiling that's buried under the hill. So if you look at this and the drawing of what's called the Upton Chamber, you'll see that it has this 14-foot, just a little over 14 feet long, opening into this almost beehive-looking room. And do we have any Star Wars fans here? I'm sure we do. It's an astronomy club. So the first thing you should think about is, isn't this where Luke Skywalker went and hid out into one of these little beehive chambers? And they look like they're from Ireland or maybe even from Malta. And the answer is yes, they look very, very similar, amazingly. So this is 10 feet high, it's buried into the hill, and it has this very long, narrow opening, so that if you're in this chamber, you can really only see outward in one specific direction. And the question is, what is that direction? So these guys down here, this says Mayor and Dix wrote a book called Manitou, which is all about some of this stuff in New England. And they said, well, if you're looking out this way and you're looking over this hill, maybe there are markers over here. And lo and behold, they discovered some bumps and some things on the hilltop that have to be aligned. And it is aligned with the summer solstice sunset. So this chamber, very unusual chamber, is aligned with the summer solstice sunset. Now, we were already talking about being in the middle of all these people living everywhere. And so where is the Upton Chamber? The Upton Chamber is right about here in these people's backyard. Okay, they don't like people wandering around all over the place looking at this. And this is the direction that we were talking about, looking up on this hill, this ridge, which isn't built up as much, but it still has all these trees on it. But it turns out that Mavor and Dix found these little structures up on that ridge and aligned them with these stars. Now, again, the provenance here is really, so why these particular stars? These aren't even necessarily the brightest ones, right? The fact that it's lined up with the summer solstice sunset, I can buy that because there's so many of these structures that do that. But some of the rest of this, I don't know. Okay, again, why we have a question mark under archaeoastronomy in the title. Here's another one, very similar looking. This is called Calendar 2. This happens to be in the state of Vermont. Is there a Calendar 1? Yes, there is a Calendar 1, but it's even in worse shape than this one, which is Calendar 2. Calendar 2 is not quite like that Upton Chamber, but it is underneath, has these huge lintels on the ceiling. These are gigantic. These weigh several tons apiece. So how they got put there and stacked up on all these freestanding rocks is kind of interesting. So that's the Calendar 2 structure. It does have an opening pointing out this way. This, again, these trees were not there in ancient times. This was an open area, but this is what you would be looking at. And if you did that on winter solstice sunrise, this is what you would see. sun is aligned with that opening in that doorway. Okay, great. So now we have at least 3 structures where we think that's true. Moving on our tour around New England, we come to one that is quite a bit different than all of the other structures, and there aren't very many of them lined up this way. This is called Gungywamp Calendar Chamber in Connecticut. It actually is a big park, the Gungywamp Park. There are a few other things that are potentially thought to be astronomically aligned, but this one is probably the best of them all, I would say, out of the ones that I've looked at. But it's not aligned with the solstices, either sunrises or sunsets. It's aligned with the equinoxes. And the equinoxes light up a special rock down here through a very small hole in the back of this, which again is built into a hillside. So if you look at the structure on the equinoxes, big sunbeam comes down and lines up against this rock over here on this wall. Interesting. It's interesting that this is a totally different kind of alignment. This is the opposite, right? Instead of lining yourself up with a stone or whatever, you're lining a beam of light up with a particular location on the wall. For those of you who may be familiar with Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, there are particular alignments of rocks there that do this with. It's called the Sun Dagger alignment in Chaco Canyon. So this is more similar to that. It's sort of lining up a sunbeam with a particular direction. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, this is that little hole. That's it. It's amazing that it's still open, but it still is. Now, some of these, here's one in Maine. This is another one, similar structure, stone structure, stacked stones. These seem to be much more regularly shaped for some reason. And it also is aligned with looking at the sunset. Okay, those are a bunch of other smaller stone structures in New England. So before I talk about this one, which is totally different than the others, does anybody have any questions about those little chambers that are scattered all over New England? No?
We have one in chat.
Okay.
Can you tell us anything about Callanish standing stones on the Line Isle of Lewis and the standing stones of steadiness in the Orkney Islands? Well,
I,
let's see.
yeah, I can't tell you any of the details off the top of my head, but there are many, many stone structures all around the world that are aligned. Now, some of the controversy around these New England looking ones is they look so similar to stone structures in several other places. Like I pointed out, they look like the little stone huts in the Star Wars movies, which actually exist on an island. There are similar looking beehive structures on the island of Malta. There are similar looking beehive structures in various places in Spain and in southern France. So one of the questions is, were these structures built by Native Americans, or were they built by Europeans who visited New England many, many, many years earlier than we thought, even before the Vikings? It's one of the big controversies that there are people who maintain that the similarities are just so strong that they must have been built by Europeans and not by Native Americans. And then there are other people, engineering people, for example, who say there are only so many solutions to using flat rocks to build structures. And eventually people are going to end up with about the same kinds of designs, just based on the fact of what can you do with stacking rocks. You have to have lintels, usually over the door frame, so everybody's going to end up doing that. As you stack these things over each other and cantilever them out, there are only so many ways that you can do that. So yeah, I've looked at a lot of other stone circle things. One of the other reasons why I put a question mark is some of the explanations about what's going on get pretty flaky, right? People get into crystal power. They get into these things having been built at power nodes on the planet. I mean, we could go on and on and on about that. And unfortunately, when you start trying to look at what the scientific evidence is, you get sucked into all of these other outside kinds of interpretations of what's going on. Let me just put it that way. Even the TV show. What was the TV show where they go to the rocks and time travel? So yeah. I'm leaving it. I'm trying not to take I know I sound very skeptical. I am very skeptical. I'm a scientist. Scientists are skeptical by nature. But I'm leaving it up to you to decide on your own how much of this you think is okay. I see a hand going up.
Got two hands. One moment.
Oh, two hands. Okay.
I was wondering if you have, or if there's any literature on the speculation about how they got those 1,000-pound stones in place.
Yeah, the book that I way back here told you, Mavor and Dix talks a little bit about that. This is it's called Manitou. Um, um, that's one place you could look. There have been various publications
Could
written.
you go back to that book name? There's some people
Oh,
want to
yeah,
write it down
sure.
real quick.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Here it is. Manitou, the Sacred Landscape of New England's Native Civilization. There is a group called NEARA, the New England Antiquities Research Association, which was started by Robert Stone, among others, which examines a lot of this stuff. They have their own newsletters and things like that. There have been several books written about America's Stonehenge. A lot of the other components that I'm showing you, like I said, tend to be on private land. And so there hasn't been as much research done on this as on America's Stonehenge or on the last one that I'm going to show you, which is the Newport Tower.
One more
So,
question.
yeah.
So just out of curiosity, so most of what you've shown us are stone structures.
Yep.
I understand that there are places around the U.S. that are also mound structures that that also
Yes.
have similar properties. And just wondering, in New England, are there any mound structures that kind of exhibit the same kind of properties?
I'm not familiar with the any big mound structures in New England. There are some in North Carolina, by the way, big mound structures that are thought to be potentially astronomically aligned. Cahokia is probably the best known of those. There are other mound structures that have shapes. There are serpents, there are various kinds of things. Those tend to be located more around central US and not in New England. And then, so we could do a whole thing just on mounds, which is a different deal. And then in the American Southwest, there are different kinds of alignments as well in structures called kivas, which are around ceremonial sacred spaces that sometimes are astronomically aligned. There are windows in some of the big grade houses in Chaco Canyon that are astronomically aligned. And I have my own pet theory that I wrote a paper for when I was getting my master's degree, that Chaco Canyon itself, the entire canyon happens to be aligned with the winter uh, solstice sunrise. And so if you stood at one end of Chaco Canyon, the entire canyon is lit up during winter solstice sunrise. So there are different kinds of structures all over. You know, and they do different things. There's the famous serpent shadow at some of the near Mexico City, right? On those structures. So I think as people have spent more time looking for archaeoastronomy phenomena, they have discovered more. So, and I think that'll continue to be the case. Yep. Anything else before we talk about, everybody get the name of this book? Okay.
We're good on the name. Thank you.
All right, good. The last one I wanted to talk about was this, which this one just blows my mind. This is called Newport Tower, and it's in Newport, Rhode Island. And this looks a lot like windmills that may have been built in England in the 1500s, 1600s. But there are a couple of strange things about this. It also looks like some Viking structures that can be found there. And if you look at so, you know, kind of neat, all these little legs holding up this tower. If you look inside, the windows are not in places where you might expect them to be. They're not laid out symmetrically. And this is now a town park, by the way. You can go visit this. That's why it has the fence around it. From this picture, this is the town of Newport. It's one of their parks. So here are these funny windows. And it turns out, I was telling you about the NERA journal. Okay, here it is, 2002. Penhallow did some analysis of these windows and determined that they have some astronomical alignments. In particular, this is an interesting one. This is what happens at sunrise on the winter solstice. Sun actually comes up and shines through two windows that happen to be aligned that allow you to see, is this the right one? Yeah, this is the winter solstice sunrise. Okay, kind of neat, kind of a neat thing. But it also, right after sunrise, like an hour later, this sunbeam comes down and hits this funny rock that's different than any of the other ones in its structure. So one might think that it's there on purpose. What the purpose was is anybody's guess, but it's interesting that that's what happens. And then even later at one of those lunar standstills that I was telling you about, but this isn't a major lunar standstill, which is where you might expect it to be. This is a minor lunar standstill. And in 1996, it actually was clear, and they could get a picture of moon shining right through the Newport Tower. So it's known that this tower was there long before people, well, let me take that back, long before Europeans were thought to be in the New World. So who built this? That's still one of the big questions. There's a lot of archaeological work that's gone on. It seems like this may have been built in the 1600s, the early 1600s. So it's plausible that the first pilgrims built this in Newport, Rhode Island, but that just doesn't seem like very likely. This has been on maps from the early 1700s, and it's again, this is one of those questionable provenances where it can't be shown one way or the other exactly what this structure was. But this is vastly different than any of the other things that I've shown you. But so in any case, it's got to be a lot younger than those other structures. Okay, how many of these things are around New England? Lots of them. There are well over 300 known sites, and in the 6 states that I told you about, Massachusetts has the most, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, and then the state I live in Maine, only 4. I don't know why Maine only has 4, but that's the way it is. So, but like I said, many of these you cannot gain access to. There are a couple of locations in Maine that I would like to visit that are beyond these 4 that the owners specifically say they won't let you visit for whatever reason. Okay, that's it. Questions, comments, testimonials? In case you're wondering what the difference is, a question needs an answer. A comment means you want to make a comment and anybody can comment back. And a testimonial is you just have something you want to say. We'll listen to what you have to say and then we'll all applaud and then you can move on. So
Now,
questions, comments, or
now,
testimonials?
now on those off-limit sites, how were you able to visit them anyway?
I have not visited them myself personally. I do know there are people who don't pay attention to what they're supposed to be doing, which then cause more problems from people who want to do a scientific investigation, right? I mean, so if somebody says you need to contact me before you come and visit and you don't do that, they're going to get upset. And the next time somebody asks, they're probably not going to let them do it. So
Now,
you can't.
the Newport Tower site, it looks like a more significant, definitely historic, where they've got the fence around it, where it's basically like a museum that's not hands-on, where you can look, but of course don't touch. You may have seen
Yeah.
me taking photos here. These are all for personal scrapbook purposes only. I probably
Sure.
print only about 5% of all I take anyway.
Yeah, well, if you want the slides, I'd be happy to share the slides with anybody who wants them to. Just write to me at my email address, which is on that title slide. I'd be happy to send them to you.
With
This one is definitely much newer, like I said, than the others. Totally different kind of construction. The question is, this looks like structures built in England and in Scandinavia as early as the 1400s. So why do we have a Scandinavian looking tower in Newport, Rhode Island? Interesting. That we know was there before Newport, Rhode Island was really populated because it's
Of
on the
course,
earliest maps. Yeah.
with all the sites you've shown here, the main Stonehenge in England is still got the lead.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. These do not compete in any way, shape, or form with Stonehenge in England, in my mind. But it's interesting that they do have so many astronomical alignments in so many different ways. So when you start studying archaeoastronomy, you start finding all kinds of interesting things. I mentioned in passing that in some of the medieval cathedrals, they actually have on the floors of the cathedrals where sun shines in through a particular little hole in the wall and mark it out on the floor, sort of as a calendar throughout the year. Now, I don't know how many people who go visit cathedrals in Europe pay any attention to the astronomical alignments. I know also there are sundials and things that show the analemma on the sides of old churches in Europe. I mean, so following astronomical objects around the sky, and marking those has been around for millennia, not just decades or, you know, hundreds of years, but literally thousands and thousands of years. I haven't mentioned the pyramids. Are the pyramids astronomically aligned? It seems like it. Are the three pyramids reflective of the belt stars in Orion? Some people think that's true because they're not quite in a straight line. You know, we could go on and on and on about it. For sure. I agree.
How many
Any other
sites? How many
Go ahead.
sites have you actually visited yourself?
I've visited about 3 or 4 of these. I've gone to a couple of other sites that I haven't talked about. This is not my main area of research. This is more of a amateur interest in what's going on, though I have written papers about both America's Stonehenge and Chaco Canyon in New Mexico.
Hi, Russ. Thank you very much. What a great talk. So
Thanks.
rather wonderfully, our house in Raleigh is laid out perfectly east-west. And at the equinox, we have a beautiful event where the beam of light shines through the bedroom all the way to the other end of the house in the living room and just makes it fluorescent. It's a wonderful thing.
So you have your own infinite corridor.
Yes.
You know, they're also in the cities where the streets are laid out in rectilinear fashion. You can get specific days of the year where the sun rises. There's Manhattan Henge, there's Boston Henge. I think a lot of cities have looked at this now just as an interesting phenomena that happens relative to the sun. So yeah. I mean, I know in our house that certainly where I read the paper in the morning changes all the time, where I have to put the curtains up and down, right? So that the sun's not just coming in your eyes. So I think those of us who pay attention to the changes notice this. Almost everybody notices the changes in shadows, say in the fall versus in summer. So here's an interesting experiment. You probably won't believe me when I tell you this, but I've done this. I had a big argument with one of my faculty about this. On the equinox, if you stick a stick in the ground, just take a stick and put it in the ground, and then throughout the day, mark where the end of its shadow is. Okay, you know what I'm saying? So you have a stick in the ground. You want to be able to have shadows all day on it. And mark throughout the day, like once an hour, once every half an hour, where the ends of the shadows are. It will be a perfectly straight line. So, you know, sometimes we wonder, how can ancient peoples have figured out east, west, north, south so precisely? Well, if you were aware of the fact that all you had to do is stick a stick in the ground and mark the shadows on the equinox, and it's a direct east-west line, you're done. Okay, so I think our forebears were very clever in some of the things that they did.
We have 2 questions in the chat. Where is the site you showed at the beginning that is in the Western USA?
The
Yes, sir.
site oh, that's a Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming, I believe it is.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, what is the area of the first site in Massachusetts?
The area of the first site.
Of
You
the-
mean
I
where
guess
is Upton,
America's-
Massachusetts?
Was that America's
It-
Stonehenge?
No, that's in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
America's Stonehenge is in Salem, New Hampshire, and it covers about 150 acres. The site I talked about in Massachusetts is in Upton, Massachusetts, which is sort of western Massachusetts, west central Massachusetts, I believe. Yeah. But that's in the middle. I showed you, maybe I should just reshare this. That's in the middle of, like we talked about a little bit. So this is Upton, Massachusetts. And that particular site is right about here in these people's backyard. Okay. Okay. Hope that answered the question.
Small is what I gather. All right. Any more questions? We got one, Frank, one moment.
I see a hand.
When they expand you out to full screen, I've got several beautiful color pictures of you speaking. And then one of the little pictures of you, I put it in one of those stone openings. It looks like a custom frame using my glorious double exposure. No
Okay.
computer needed. See the finished
Yeah.
picture on the site.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If there's no more questions, Russ, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for sharing today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for asking.
You can't hear the applause probably, but it's quite loud.
Okay.
All right.